Hello, YouTube, and welcome into the 6th annual live undergraduate original research streaming presentations here. I'm your host for the day, Dr. Ryan Stouffer, joined by my co-host, maybe my Chewbacca to my Han, or maybe I'm the Chewbacca to Han, Dr. Alec Hosterman. And what we're proud to bring you another edition here of live streaming research here from undergraduate students. Not only do the students get to present their research, but this entire event is also being live streamed by students behind the scenes. So we could take a look in the control room there, look at the class hard at work making this all happen. So in between presentations here, you get to see all the people at hard at work behind the scenes. You also get to see Skycam. Sponsorship still available here to get to see what's going on there. And so it's pretty an awesome experience here where we get to combine our original research with students producing the content here. Dr. Hosterman will tell us a little about the research his students performed.
Both of our sections are actually very similar. I took a qualitative approach to research. So my students ended up interviewing 12 different individuals looking for patterns and themes in terms of the literature that they ended up finding. Dr. Stouffer's group, we did quantitative research here. So quantitative research also does look for large patterns of human communication, assuming everyone is going to react. Not everyone, most people are going to react in a similar manner given a similar situation. So all my students conducted a survey with at least 100 responses. Shout out to Emma there for 650 responses. And then they took that data, ran it through some lovely t-tests, some correlations, some chi-squared, things like that. And then we're looking for large patterns of communications and how people interacted about given topics here. So what's cool is all our students are doing this original research here as an undergraduate we often don't see in many comm programs around the country. So in a few minutes here, we'll get started with our first presentation here. Each presentation will be about 7 minutes long, and we will continue through the afternoon and get to hear a bunch of original undergraduate research. So stay tuned. Thank you.
everyone. My name is Gibson McClung. Unfortunately, my partner couldn't be with me today, but the show must go on. So we're going to do our presentation on the dangers of groupthink. So to start off, we did our research topic on the effects of groupthink, and our research gap was that groupthink mentality and extracurricular student activities. So a few theories that we used were social identity theory, which are the definition of the first one, social identity theory, is to aim to specify, predict the circumstances under which individuals think of themselves as individuals or group members. So that definition came from Britannica, and that definition sort of talks about how people think of themselves differently when they're inside of a group. They think of themselves as the group and not themselves as individuals. The other definition is contagion theory. This definition is being a part of a crowd causes people to behave in a certain way. That came from pedia.com. And that definition kind of talks about mob mentality, basically, how when you become sort of part of a crowd, you're going to be pulled in by everybody. There we go. So our participation from the students that we had here, it was anybody over 18 that went to Longwood. The procedures that we followed were survey, sample questions, open-ended questions, things like that. So part of our discussion came from the emotions in group setting. So that definition is a person's emotion can set the tone for how people will interact with each other. So kind of what that means is why would somebody not speak up or speak up against something based off somebody else's emotion? So if someone's very passionate about something, more or not, the person inside the group, like an individual, is not going to speak up to somebody else because that person is so passionate about that subject. Another definition that we had was unspoken rules. So the unset of spoken rules that determine what appropriate behavior is in a group setting. So speaking up or not speaking up to somebody. So if there is a president of an organization and the unspoken rule is that you will not talk to that president unless it's in a formal setting, that would be sort of an unspoken rule that we would have inside that group. Another discussion point that we made was a spiral of silence, which was defined as individuals staying quiet about an opinion in a group and if it doesn't conform to that group's idea. So an example of that, a really big example, is family gatherings. I know a lot of people have family gatherings with others, and you really can't talk about certain points or certain opinions like politics. That would be a huge thing that people usually wouldn't talk about. They would just rather stay quiet about it instead of causing a controversy. Another thing is social identity. So knowledge that people belong and are tied to certain social groups. So stereotypical high school groups kind of fall into that category. So things like jocks or the popular kids or band kids, things like that, people fall into those niche groups. So some limitations that we found with our research, the sample size obviously was only Longwood students. We wanted to reach out to more people, but that is unfortunately what we had to do with our students. The survey construct, a lot of open-ended questions that we had. We had 4 open-ended questions where only 2 were required, and these open-ended questions were very long in length, so a lot of students didn't want to answer them fully. So I think that was a limitation that we had. And another limitation was not having enough non-group organization people. We pulled from people that were a part of groups and organizations on campus, but we didn't pull from enough people that weren't a part of it, so the disparity was huge when it came to our research and our data. When it comes to further research, a different sample, I want to get a balance of people that are part of in and out groups, and what that sort of means is that if you think about it like the high school example earlier, an in-group would be people that are the popular kids, and the out-group would pretty much be everybody else. People from the out-group want to be a part of the in-group, and the in-group doesn't think they're a part of the in-group. So it's kind of that dichotomy there. An experiment, we want to do an in-person experiment. The survey kind of worked with us, but an in-person experiment can actually get people's real raw emotions when it comes to certain open-ended questions that we had asked. Lastly, when it came to part of our discussion, these are some of the results that we got. One of our examples was people, whether they were a part of an organization or not, they primarily chose the same thing. When it came percentage-wise, the numbers were roughly the same, as you can see with that first graph on the right. People were more likely to help someone, even if it strayed from the idea of the group's organizations. One of the questions that we had was if you were a part of a group and they all walked away from a person that needed help, would you walk away with those people or would you help the person that's actually in need and stray from the group's ideas. And a lot of people chose that they would help the person and they would stray away from the group's ideas, which is what we'd actually want in society. And people in groups were more comfortable expressing opinions in a group setting compared to those people who weren't a part of our group. So as you can see from the first graph, it shows that percentage-wise, all of these numbers are fairly the same percentage-wise across the board. But when you get down to the bottom graph, it shows that the comfortability of people in a group vastly outnumbers people not in a group, even percentage-wise. You can see how when it comes to depends on a situation, percentage-wise, it's roughly the same. But when it comes to comfortability-wise, it's not the same. So that is something that comes out of being in a group, I guess, is being comfortable discussing your own opinions. I want to thank you all so much for giving me the time today to discuss my research, and thank you so much.
All right. Hello, everyone. My name is Sam Bryan.
And my name is Jack Barclay.
And today we're going to be talking about smartphones, social media, and its side effects, and how it's a modern addiction. All right, let's get into it.
To start off our research project, we wanted to look into a topic that we thought was very pertinent to Longwood University, but also America in general. Our first thing we wanted to look into was social media and smartphone usage and how it affected the mental health and well-being of young adolescents, specifically university students. So the research gap we wanted to acknowledge firsthand was the fact that research had already discussed the dark side of social media with impacts such as addiction, fear of missing out, and social media problems and misuse. And then we also already had research acknowledge problematic social media usage and the negative impacts on adolescents. And so that led us to our 2 research questions, the first one being, how does social media use impact the mental health of university students? And our second question is, how does smartphone use impact the mental health of university students?
All right, next up, I'm going to talk about the methodology. So for this, we pulled in 12 different participants, and we had a set of demographics that we were looking for. We were looking for university students that had experience with social media, and then we wanted them in the age group of around 18 to 23, which is the college age range, because that was our topic. And then our recruitment procedures, we primarily utilized text messages and social media, given that we were studying social media. And then for our procedures, again, 12 interviewees, excuse me, and they were all done face-to-face, not over Zoom or anything like that. And the average length was 14 minutes, and then we transcribed the information utilizing an application called otter.ai, which is an application that transcribes it for us, and then Jack and I went back and spell checked it all. And then every answer was anonymous and confidential, meaning that there was no names put to any faces or any answers like that. So if anyone said anything they didn't want to share with the public, their name would never be attached to it. And then lastly, after we had all of our information, we utilized data analysis through a thematic analysis where we made umbrella terms that described our data using or noticing repetition, keywords, and forcefulness or emphasis that our interviewees gave us on their answers.
So after developing this methodology, we decided to finally gather our results and make 2 themes apparent that we had found. The first theme using thematic analysis was social pressure. This existed such as external factors outside, being people that you look up to, role models, influencers, parents, people around you using social media already, making participants feel like they had to use it as well. An example of this was a subject said, "It's just drilled into my brain that I'm supposed to have social media and like it." And the relevance of all of this is that a majority of our participants and subjects noted this same effect of social pressure from external factors pushing them to use social media. That brought us to our second theme, addiction and side effects. So self-identified side effects that we noticed were addiction to their phone and social media, fear of missing out, anxiety, lowered self-esteem, and loss of attention span. An example of this was one subject saying, "I couldn't go a day without it" when referencing social media, and then another subject saying, "Even in conversations, I'll just kind of get bored and start focusing on other things." So again, this theme was very prevalent in our research, going through a majority of all of our participants.
Oops. Hold on. All right, my bad. All right, so next up, the discussion. I'm going to be talking about 3 different umbrella terms that we noticed with all of our data. And so first of all, we're going to start with how iPhones or even Android smartphones in general and social media is a very addictive thing. There's a correlation between a notification and a hit of dopamine in the same way that a hard drug or even a normal drug can give to you. And it forms addictive habits. And then the most interesting thing to me was the fact that students would point out and self-identify that they're addicted to these things, but then they would note that they have no intention of giving it up. After that, we noticed that attention spans have been severely shortened, and this is mostly due to short-form content. If you don't know already, TikTok videos are basically the primary culprit, And basically, this is a significant self-reported drop of attention span where people can't even focus on daily activities such as paying attention in class or even holding a normal conversation. And then the last category that we noticed was relationship infidelity, where the internet provides instant gratification where you can basically meet anyone you want, anytime you want, and the extreme of that is that it's very easy to make new friends and lovers, and of course that means it's easier to cheat in this day and age.
So with our research project, we also wanted to acknowledge our limitations, given that we were pulling from a very small subject size. Our first limitation was our subject group sample size. Since we were pulling from Longwood University, very specifically as a small school, it made our subject pool smaller. We had 12 participants as our total sample size. Then we wanted to also acknowledge our recruitment tactics. Given that we were studying social media and wanted people that were chronically online, we limited our recruitment strategy to word of mouth and social media for recruitment. However, we acknowledge that we are more likely pulling from people who think similarly, or what would be known as an echo chamber effect. And lastly, diversity. Since our university subject pool was primarily white, it limited us to very certain perspectives that aren't quite global. So we wanted to acknowledge all three of these.
All right, for our last category, we're going to be talking about future research, which in other words means that if anyone wanted to replicate our study or if we did in the future, how we could make it better. We have 3 different categories. Our first one is broadening the subject scope. As previously mentioned, things like diversity, but also I think something that could be very interesting is interviewing people who are not chronically online, or in other words, people who don't check their phone or social media every single day. I think putting these side by side could be pretty interesting. Secondly, we have quantifying side effects, where if we could actually put a tangible number to people's attention spans that they have today, I think that could probably provide some pretty interesting insight. And then comparing social media users and non-users could help that as well. And then lastly, we suggest a longitudinal study, where our study was the thing where we had multiple subjects studied in a short period of time, but we think that if you took just a few subjects and then studied them over multiple years, you'd keep variables limited, and basically you'd be able to research how it impacts them over their entire life. And with that, I'd like to thank you for tuning in. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Hello, my name is David Turner,
And I'm Roman Dangle.
and our research paper is titled The Impact of Sports on Mental Health, A Fan's Perspective. So the communication phenomenon that we chose to explore was fan emotions in sports, and it's basically what you feel while you're experiencing a sporting event. And our specific thing is that we are researching whether or not a fan's engagement with their team has any positive or negative impact on the fan's mental health. We figured that this would be a good research topic because it helps to find what sports create the highest level of fan identification. The theories that we applied to our research are social penetration theory, which states that as relationships develop, communication moves from shallow baseline context to more deep conversations that help integrate you into the group. The second theory that we applied is social identity theory, which states that a sense of self is made from group membership and communications within the group, which also helps you to integrate yourself into a group environment. For methodology, our participants were sports fans of any age. We had 109 respondents to our survey, 60 of which were men, 47 of which were women. One was non-binary, and one's gender was not listed in the survey. For our procedure, we shared our survey on social media and throughout the communication department via email. Our survey was roughly 3 minutes long, and example question would be, how would you rate yourself as a fan? 1 being not a fan and 5 being a strong fan. For our results, our first hypothesis, we found a significant correlation between sports fans' mental health after the games and their level of fan identification. For our second hypothesis, we found a non-significant correlation of soccer fans being the most popular sport, even though they were slightly more popular. For our post hoc hypothesis, we found significant variance between the emotions felt by different genders whilst they were watching sports. And onto the constructs. The first construct that we applied to our research was mental health in relation to sports team success. This is the most important construct in our research, as it's how we gauge the effectiveness of almost every other construct I'll be going over here soon. And this construct helps us to track how impactful the sports team truly is, as well as showing how affected the fans are after their games. The second construct that I'll be going over is in-group, out-group identification. This construct is about how you're perceived differently once you're better accepted into a group. And it means that as you join a fandom, you'll start to be more accepted and included in the events. And once you're accepted and included, you'll tend to have better overall mental well-being as you're part of a collective. The third construct is fandom and fans' perceptions, and we needed to track this to see if people with high fan identification would be happier than the average sports fan. And we believe that the higher fan identification someone has, the happier they would be when their team won, as it's intrinsically linked. For the fourth construct, it's fans' preferred sports, and we tracked this to see if there's any specific sport that had overall higher identification than others. And this is important to see if there's a sport whose fans have high levels of identification, to see which sport has the best and happiest fans.
For our limitations, for our sample size, we felt as adding more respondents would help our survey to make it, one, more accurate, and two, it would make more perceptions for our study. And then for our survey construction, we found many limitations through our study, but some that we could add would having more questions for each hypothesis will help verify our assumptions. And then for our American sports, we found that soccer fans were the most passionate fans, and they're primary European fans, so that was one of our limitations because most of our respondents were Americans. For our different sample, we would also recommend from a different sample to see if the conclusion we made holds across different demographics. And then for our other constructs, if we were able to find different constructs that backed up our research, it would help our hypothesis. And then for our experiment method, which would help our study, would to have a video or visual aid of like a team winning, just show see their emotions after they won. And then we found during our post hoc analysis that there was a significant difference in emotions felt between genders when they were watching sports. We felt like this could be contributed to how different genders perceive sports and how they consume media. For our main takeaway, we found our first hypothesis was supported because we found if someone has a high fan identification, then their mental health will be more tied to that team because they want to support them. And our research also showed that once you identify as part of the fandom and how your team performs, then your mental health will be more affected.
Thank you again for listening to us, and I hope you guys have a wonderful day.
Hi, I'm Kaitlyn Harris,
And I'm Ainsley Rowlison.
and today we're going to be talking about if university involvement makes students happy.
Our research topic dives into the impact that organizational involvement has on college students, specifically focusing on happiness. By understanding the important factors that impact this study, both students and organizations can be made more aware on what positive impacts can be made to affect happiness. A research gap that we found was the lack of ability to define happiness. In a cross-sectional survey stated that happiness cannot be defined in one sentence. However, it's subjective based on one's relationships, academic standing, and organizational involvement. After seeing where research gaps were, we formulated the research question, what is the relationship between involvement and overall happiness within college students?
For this research, we interviewed 12 participants that were all university freshmen, sophomore, juniors, and seniors. We recruited participants through word of mouth and conducted in-person interviews. The length of our interviews was 7 minutes and 55 seconds. And then the data was transcribed, and we used thematic analysis to develop 2 themes. Those themes were internal and external factors that influence happiness and involvement. When developing those themes, we used repetition, keywords, and forcefulness.
Going into the results, first being the internal factors that influence happiness and involvement. First internal factor being absence of stress, which is the lack of stress impacting one's ability to manage their well-being. The example we have on the screen of a participant stating the less stressed that they are, the happier they feel. This is relevant to our study by understanding varying levels of stress result in varying levels of happiness. The second internal factor being sense of belonging, this being the feeling of finding one's place at the university. A quote from a participant was, "If you get on the outskirts and all of your friends are on the in, your happiness goes down." This relates to our study by showing that students who become involved feel like they have a place in their community. The last internal factor being burnout. A participant shared that when they become too involved too fast, they become exhausted and overwhelmed and are forced to cut back. In an interview, we found that a senior, after dropping a lot of organizations due to being too involved and feeling burnout, was feeling happier with her decision to cut back. This internal factor works to show that being too involved can negatively impact happiness.
So the second theme we found was external factors that influence happiness and involvement. So the first sub-theme being feeling supported. This is just knowing someone that's there for you even when you don't know that you need them. This example from a participant talks about how being involved in her sorority made it so that she has a support system away from home, and that just goes to show that people join organizations so that they have a support system. The second being academic major. This participant talked about how she didn't feel like she could be involved outside of the classroom because she just had so much workload that stemmed from her major, and so she wasn't very involved in the university outside of the classroom. So from our data, we found 2 different relationships that were present within happiness of college-involved students. First being positive, meaning that the more involved a student was, the happier that they were. And this is important because students can maintain their current involvement and keep it healthy while maintaining their happiness. But also if they're focusing on those positive relationships, they can further their involvement at the university and further relationships. The second relationship we found was a negative relationship. So the more involved you are, the less happy you are. And this is important because students can find a way to manage that stress so that they can make their involvement something that brings them joy and happiness. But also students can make the choice to become involved over time rather than all at once, to eliminate feeling that burnout that was talked about.
Within our limitations, we found that narrow demographics, our original demographics were non-involved underclassmen and upperclassmen involved in 3 to 5 organizations, making a small pool of individuals that we could interview. The second limitation being our own personal bias. We recruited participants through word of mouth, which in return resulted in us interviewing individuals who stem from our own connections, and we believe by eliminating that bias, a broader demographic and in-depth results will be provided.
So for our future research, we suggest doing an anonymous survey. We feel that participants would be more likely to share their personal feelings about their involvement and their happiness at the university if their name wasn't attached. If they didn't feel comfortable in our in-person interview, they wouldn't share those things, so we just feel like we would have more research to talk about. And also this would allow for a wider demographic rather than just at our university. We could reach multiple universities and colleges. And secondly, we suggest to go into depth about the size of the university and if that has an impact on people's involvement. We don't know if people are involved at the smaller university or more involved at a bigger university, and we feel that you can go into depth about the motivation to be involved with that study. And also, again, we can encompass multiple universities within that study so that we have a wider demographic of results. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hello everyone, welcome to our presentation about consumerism on social media. My name is Ahmed.
I'm Ezekiel.
Let's get into it. So going into our research topic, we studied how social media can affect individual purchase habits. So when we looked at previous research from Erdogmus and CISEC, they showed that repeated exposure to social media can shape an individual's perspective on brands. So we looked at how that correlates specifically to young adults' behavior in purchasing products on TikTok, Twitter, Facebook, YouTube, and Instagram. The two theories we used were social cognitive theory, which is how social, cultural, environmental factors influence behaviors and attitudes, and cultivation theory, which is how media can influence our actions. Going into our two hypotheses, the first one was if a young adult is exposed to social media for more than 3 hours a day, then they are more likely to buy advertised products. And our second one was, if a consumer's most used social media platform is Twitter, then they are less likely to purchase from advertisements.
So breaking down our methodology, we had a age range of 18 to 82. We had a total of 117 responses, of which 114 were valid. As far as demographics go, 69.2% were female and 30.8% were male. 64 of which were over the age of 25, which will kind of be important as we go into the results section. And as far as the actual research procedures, we did a Google survey, 9 questions in total, one of which was an open-ended question. Average length time was about a minute to a minute 15 seconds. And for our results, our hypothesis 1 was significant. However, it was not as predicted as intended. And what that basically means is that it was correct, but it was the opposite result. We predicted that young adults would be significant, but it was the older generation that we found was the results. And so our hypothesis 2 was not supported, and that was pretty much due to the fact that with hypothesis 2, we wanted to look at Twitter, and we only had about 7 responses that were Twitter-based responses. So that was automatically rejected just because the amount of responses weren't available. And for our post hoc hypothesis, if an individual 25 or older has a disposable income, they are more likely to spend on advertisements they see on social media.
Well said, Zeke. Going into our construct 1, which was brand loyalty, it's the idea that consumers are more likely to be loyal to brands that they perceive as a part of themselves. So we asked an open-ended question trying to see reasonings for purchasing advertised products on our survey. We pulled answers directly from the survey that relate to each construct. For brand loyalty, one participant said, knowing the company I'm ordering from, and another one said product description and known brand name. Moving on to construct 2, which is social media exposure. That just refers to total screen time on social media as well as what is being viewed during that time. An example pulled directly from our survey was, it was something that I was thinking about buying when it showed up on my feed.
So moving on to constructs 3 and 4, we looked at brand marketing and perception of brands. For brand marketing, we're looking at, does the consumer form an emotional attachment due to the way a brand would advertise on social media? And some example of that from the open-ended question of the survey was appearance of the product and influenced by images and video of the item in use. And for construct 4, perception of brands, this is basically if a consumer has a preconceived notion of a brand prior to their decision to purchase. As you can see, an example was the product was something I was already looking at online, or I recognized the name brand.
All right, moving on to our limitations. The first one is sample size. Right, ideally we would want to have more participants than 114, and we would want to have more balance between gender and age. Our second limitation is variable measurement. All right, we didn't put in enough questions that were detailed enough to relate to all of our constructs.
So going into future research after that, obviously we want to focus mainly more on the younger generation, possibly just straight up do a survey that's capped at 25 years old, only look at 18 to 25-year-olds to more kind of get a better understanding of that generation. And as far as based on our constructs now and our results, other constructs in the future research could be brand trust and emotional attachment. We saw a lot of responses based on emotional attachment, and future research could be like an example of if someone is only an Xbox person and so they're only going to buy an Xbox console or PlayStation, vice versa. So what does this all matter? Brand perceptions matter. People are purchasing items based on what they know about the company, and influential factors like peer recommendations and appearance of the product mainly play key factors in their decision of purchasing.
Right, and social media exposure is also a key factor. We found that individuals that were exposed to social media for more than 3 hours a day were far more likely to purchase advertised products than those who were on it for less time. And we looked at a study from Lao in 2017 that found exposure was highest amongst ages 13 to 24. However, in our study, we found that ages 25 and above had the highest time of exposure on social media. So the old heads are on social media just as much. Thank you guys for watching. We hope you enjoyed the next presentation.
Peace.
Hi, my name is Abby Birchmeier.
My name is Loren Bender, and today we're talking about is the value of a college education impacted by post-graduation plans?
So our research topic is to have a better understanding if having a job before graduation determines how we define the worth of a college education. Our main research question was, how does having a job before graduation impact your perception of the value of a college education?
For our methodology, participants or demographics were university students in their second semester senior year, all graduating in May of 2023. Our recruitment procedures were through email. And then our procedures, 12 interviews, average length of 4 minutes, and our data was transcribed by Otter. And for data analysis, we used thematic analysis, themes developed using repetition, keywords, and forcefulness.
So we had 4 main results, and the 2 results I'm going to be talking about are preparedness versus unpreparedness. So for preparedness, a lot of our interviewees talked a lot about how their major prepared their students to find a job, to apply for jobs, and their outlook on having a job postgraduate. One of our participants said that they had a class that helped them take the necessary steps to get a job within their field, which was incredibly helpful for them. And this is relevant by showing how prepared majors helped students further their job search. And for unprepared, it was honestly like the complete opposite. So how other majors did not help prepare their students for their job search. And one of our participants said that I'm confused on where to find jobs within a marketing concentration. And this is relevant by showing how the lack of preparedness by majors increases student anxiety and job hunting.
Okay, for our other results, the first one we have emotional reaction. Participants showed a strong emotional reaction while answering interview questions. An example of this is, I think if I did have a job, I'd be a little bit more excited to leave. But because I'm just kind of in this ancient tangle of what's going to happen, this is relevant because we see emotion showed that participants care about their future and what's happening after graduation. They're just having a hard time getting to that next step.
And then we have relationship building. Professors have taught participants how to build professional relationships outside of college. An example in our research is a subject said, I've taken a lot of courses where I've learned the etiquette of a business dinner. We've also gone golfing to learn how to have a business meeting outside the office. And this shows that department taking steps to make sure that their students are able to talk outside of a professional setting. So our two biggest discussion points was having a societal change of what it means to earn a degree. When interviewees were asked if their education was worth it despite not having a job, most stated the value of the experience is different from the value of the degree, but both are still valuable for postgraduate. Other students recognize that the college education is about experiences and the lessons learned, not just the degrees. The future generation will have the opportunity, or hopefully the future generation will have the opportunity to celebrate the process of obtaining a degree without the education itself. So for some of our limitations, lack of diversity, all our interviewees except one were white, and over 80% of our participants were female. For graduate students, we had 2 interviewees that were going to grad school, and they did not identify grad school as a job. And then we started in the middle of the job search, so students were still in the job application process. Interviews at beginning versus the end of the semester would have been helpful. So for future research, we would encourage that there is more diversity within the interviewees and participants, so equal amount of gender and more of a ethnic reputation and not all white participants. That was a big limitation we saw. And then another future research point would be to interview seniors more at the beginning of the school year, talking kind of from beginning to end of how their job application, participation, everything was going versus right in the middle of it. That really skewed our data. And then our last point for future research is interview more participants of a specific major and not having such a broad view. I think that would have given us more insight on how majors prepared certain individuals in different classes for graduation. Thank you so much for listening.
Hi, my name is Tori Booth.
And I'm Megan Whalen.
And this is our semester research on the screen time effects on overall health. To start off with our research topic, we wanted to ask a question about the correlation between the amount of time spent, which was screen time, on social media and mental health. There were not a lot of prior research studies that were done in order for us to gain information in regards to our research study, that's why that's our research gap. But there were a lot of research studies that we found that were relating to mental health and social media. So for some of our theories, we decided to use the displaced behavior theory and the uses and gratifications theory. For starters, the uses and gratifications theory is the fulfillment from engagements that one gets from social media. The displaced behavior theory is equal to whoever spends the most time on social media, it equals to the less time that they spend in the real world. For our hypotheses, the H1 is the amount of screen time daily and how it affects the amount of sleep a person gets at night. For our hypotheses number 2, the amount of social media usage daily directly affects mental health. For our post-hypothesis, the rates of screen time usage at night will be the highest amongst 18 to 24-year-olds.
Moving on to our methodology, we originally had 141 participants. And after analysis, we had to remove 2 participants' responses due to misleading content. For our procedures, we conducted a Google Forms survey, which consisted of 13 questions and took about 2 minutes to complete. Some examples of our research questions were, do you think it's important to monitor your social media usage? And do you spend a lot of your screen time at night? For our results, we found that our hypothesis 1 was significant with a p-value of 0.03. Our second hypothesis was found to be not significant with a p-value of 0.32. And our post hoc hypothesis was found to be significant with a p-value of 0.002.
For our first construct, we wanted to discuss screen time. Screen time refers to how much time a person spends on their cellular device, computer, or really any device that has a screen that they're able to watch content on. What this means is that individuals with a higher screen time average are expected to have lower mental health levels. For our second construct, we decided to use active versus passive consumption. Active versus passive consumption refers to where an individual is physically consuming their media. What we predicted what would happen is that more screen time usage and social media usage at night would lead to sleep and mental health issues, most likely because they're consuming that media from a place of rest.
Moving on to our last 2 constructs, different social media applications refers to the amount of social media usage on applications. An example of this is individuals who spend more time on social media will be impacted negatively regarding mental health. Our last construct is different mental health issues, which refers to specific disorders such as insomnia and anxiety. An example of this is to see if there is a correlation between mental health disorders and the time spent on social media.
Some of our limitations included our sample size. Our sample size was highly dominated by female responses, and 110 of them out of the 139 responses that we counted were female. Our survey construction, we should have incorporated more open-ended questions into our survey instead of asking questions based on the Likert scale. Then lastly, for a limitation, we should have added more social media platforms, and we should have asked participants which social media platforms they spend the most time on.
Moving on to future research, our first recommendation for future researchers is to uphold a larger sample size with more variation in ages and gender. This will provide connections between screen time consumption and with different ages and genders. Our next recommendation is to record the average amount of screen time used by an individual, which will show data on how much screen time one is consuming. Our last recommendation is to incorporate other platforms which will provide additional insight into the amount of screen time consumed.
For our last part of our discussion, we want to talk about these 2 graphs and our results of our hypotheses. So for the graph on the top right, we decided to look at the amount of screen time consumed at night, and it was found to impact sleep habits, with z-value from a z-score test of 5.177, we can conclude that it is 5 values away from the average. For our second graph, on the bottom, there was no relationship between social media usage at night and mental health issues, which this z-value is also around 5, which means that it is 5 values away from the average. Lastly, for our post-hypothesis, we had the 18 and 24-year-olds were found to have the highest amount of screen time usage at night.
Tori and I thank you for listening in on our research presentation on screen time effects on overall health.
Hello, my name is Loren Muster.
And I'm Vega Overstreet.
And our research project is on college students and eating habits, the influential effects of independent living and a healthy lifestyle. Our research topic is about the decisions college students face about their eating habits when they are living independently. Specifically, we focused on the differences in eating habits between living at home with a guardian and living independently at college. We researched different influential factors that affect college students. Our research question was, how does independent living influence college students' eating habits?
Moving on to our methodology, we had our recruiting requirements were that students had to have access to a kitchen at their disposal. Along with that, we recruited people using text and email. And throughout the study, we conducted 12 interviews, and the average length of each interview was 13 minutes long. Then we transcribed data using Otter online. We used a thematic analysis, and we found themes using repetition, keywords, and forcefulness.
From our interviews, we found 6 influences that repeatedly appeared. For our internal influences, those are that can be controlled by participants. These were nutritional knowledge that participants had and diet choices they made at college. Participant 8 said, "I only eat 2 meals a day." We found this to be consistent with most of our participants.
Moving on to external influences, we found 4 separate ones, and the first one being time. And the amount of time students have or lacked of having time affected the amount of food that they ate and the quality of the food that they ate. The next influence we found was stress, and stress can result in varying results from either binging or not eating at all due to being stressed under classes. And then the next influence after that is financial resources. And we found that the lack of finances seems to play a role in what students are eating, and students said that they ended up eating more cheap and unhealthy foods due to their lack of financial resources. And lastly, we found that relationships had the biggest impact out of all of these, and students expressed that their interactions with friends and roommates and others affected what they ate. And participant 3 said, "The food that's in the house is also the food that they want to eat. I'm not the only one making decisions about what we are eating."
From the data we collected, we concluded that these influences have a negative impact on college students' eating habits. The lack of time, resources, and knowledge were the main influences found. Most of these influences were mentioned to happen simultaneously, and we believe that if these were not factors, that students would have more time to focus on eating healthy.
We found 3 separate limitations while conducting this study, the first one being location. And we found that because our location was in a rural small town, it affects the access that students have for restaurants and grocery stores, which in turn affects what they are eating. There's also another influence, including location, was operational hours, because the nature of small towns, operational hours tend to be shorter, which also affects when students are eating.
Along with location, we found that subject representation and major weight loss were other limitations. We had 2 male athlete participants in this study, but we did not have any female athletes. This representation may have shown us the difference in eating habits. We also had 2 male participants go through a major weight loss, and we had no representation of female weight loss to compare it to, and the difference of body types.
Lastly, we found 2 avenues of future research that could be made possible, and the first one being studying student athletes and their eating habits. Student athletes have a very different perspective because they have a different access to resources such as nutritionists and just the overall knowing of what is healthy and what isn't. And student athletes overall have very different diets and have more controlled diets than maybe the average student, and they also do work out and burn more calories than the average student. And then mental health eating was the other future research that could be made possible, and we could study the relationship between mental health and eating habits, including eating disorders.
Thank you all so much for listening to our presentation, and have a great day.
Hello, my name is Rachelle, and this is my project. I'm a dog person. I love them. I've always been fascinated by those people who say their dogs look and act like them. Could that be true? I wanted to find out, so I reviewed 10 studies that intrigued me. My 3 favorite ones were perspectives on human-dog bonding, like owner like dog, and dog and owner characteristics that affect their relationship. So basically, I set out to find out, do dogs mimic their owners? I've used 2 theories to formulate my hypothesis. First, the looking glass theory. In the early 1900s, Charles Cooley argued that self sees itself as others see them. This is a direct result of their interactions. Dogs see themselves through the eyes of their owners. They feel good about themselves when their owners praise them and are happy. Second, the social identity theory. Sociologist Henry, and I will butcher this, Teifel, argued that the group gives us a sense of social security. We tend to group ourselves and be like those in our social group. So given this theory, maybe dogs follow suit and they want to conform to their group or pack setting to be more symbiotic with their owner. Based on research and theories, I came up with 3 hypotheses. If the owner and dogs are of the opposite gender, they'll be more symbiotic. If the dog has received professional training, this dyad will have more symbiotic relationship. And third, the human-dog dyad will be more symbiotic when the owners have a higher level of attachment to their dog. I took an existing survey, the Monash Dog-Owner Relationship Scale, and I modified it and added an open question. I asked 22 closed questions, 1 open question, plus demographics. I put a link to the survey on Facebook and Yik Yak and got a total of 100. 5 were eliminated because they did not meet the criteria. The results were surprising to me, and none of my hypotheses were supported. Some approached significance, but were nonetheless not supported. After analyzing the responses, I found that those with limited or no training had a higher level of attachment to their dog. Could training actually reduce the bond? Training may add a more mechanical element to this pairing that could weaken their bond. Regarding breeds, research indicated that breed could play a major role in creating symbiotic relationships, but I did not test for this construct. I do, however, consider this to be an avenue for future research. And here we go to emotional support. We know dogs help humans with stress, depression, and anxiety, and isolation. But do they share these feelings with their owners? The survey respondents said no. They indicated that their dogs are loving and smart, but do not share that level of emotional bonding. Does the opposite gender pairing create a more symbiotic relationship? Respondents also said no. The gender of the owner and the dog does not seem to factor into the symbiotic relationship. Our limitations include sample, intact dog versus fixed, and breed. For the sample, we had way more female respondents than male, 76% female. That was a much higher amount that was limited to our study from getting a more balanced response. The second one, spayed, neutered versus fixed. Might a dog that is intact have a different relationship with its owner than a dog that has been neutered, that's spayed or neutered? We did not ask this question on the survey, therefore we do not know the answer. Breed. Although it was one of my constructs, I did not test for this in the survey. The breed of the dog may have a significant influence on a symbiotic relationship. So here is the future research that I can certainly focus on, or that we can certainly focus on. The role of training and whether or not it could weaken the human-dog dyad, considering how, according to the American Kennel Club 2021 survey, more people are investing in dog training. Could this training interfere with an owner's level of attachment to their dog? Intact versus fixed dogs could tell us about the role of hormones in creating symbiotic relationship. And lastly, the dog's breed. Some breeds require the owner to be more energetic. Other breeds are looking for a job. Could matching the correct dog breed to the owners help create a more symbiotic relationship? These are 3 avenues for future exploration. Although some researchers like Scobert have said that dogs and their owners have a special attachment that could possibly lead them to have a symbiotic relationship, this project has not found evidence to support this claim. The majority of survey respondents stated that dog owners do not believe their canines look or behave like them. Lastly, survey respondents believe their dogs are companions who mostly react to their owner's energy level and provide support. Do dogs mimic their owners physically or behaviorally? Our project says no, but the internet says yes. Is this manufactured by the media, dog grooming professionals, or dog enthusiasts? Maybe. But my project's respondents say those claims are not supported. And that is it. Thank you for watching.
Hi, I'm Kendal Clapham.
And I'm Reese Vandell, and our communication research topic was the communication styles of relationships and friendships.
Methods of communication can be different for every relationship for a variety of reasons. Romance or platonic, the method of communication that is used can result in the overall satisfaction of the partners involved. 12 participants of this study were interviewed and asked a variety of questions regarding their methods of communication and the habits of communication that were used.
For our methodology, we had three sections: participants, procedures, and data analysis. For participants, our demographic was university students in friendships or relationships for longer than 3 months. We recruited participants via Google Forms and scheduled interviews through texts and emails. For the procedure, we interviewed 12 subjects in person and face-to-face. The average length was from 30 to 35 minutes, with both ranging lesser times and more time. And we transcribed each interview recording into written words. From the data analysis, we thematically analyzed the interviews and developed 4 themes. We developed themes by repetition, keywords, and forcefulness of responses.
When focusing on location, participants may use different methods of communication depending on the distance from the other person. This theme was chosen because location routinely came up when discussing the different methods of communication and why participants use those different methods. The understanding of different lives, as well as the priorities and schedules that come with it, makes it important for people to set communication expectations with each other. Surface level communication through social media was chosen because most participants revealed that when they used social media to communicate, there were little serious or deep conversations being made. Social media, because of its quick nature, makes communication through its users fast and simple, but because of this, the importance of conversations can decrease because of the ease and speed in which they happen.
For our third theme, we decided on the preferred communication of face-to-face or in-person communication. We gathered that most, if not all, subjects preferred face-to-face communication because of the easiness to read tone of voice, facial expressions, body language, and other nonverbal cues. For our fourth and last theme, we decided on the unhealthy communication of social media. We gathered from our participants that most communication through social media was not conducive for deep conversations, was most common for inconsistent communication, and there was much more room for misunderstandings and conflict.
Many participants in long-distance or mid-distance relationships said that because they don't have the access to face-to-face communication other than FaceTime, they had to communicate through other methods. For surface-level social media, participants seemed to feel that if they wanted to have serious conversations, they would either communicate face-to-face, over the phone, or through FaceTime, but not through social media. For face-to-face preferred communication, all participants supported the idea that with face-to-face communication, it makes it easier to read tone of voice, facial expressions, and body language than other methods. For unhealthy communication through social media, participants shared that communication through social media had no depth and conversations stayed surface level. This supports the theme because conversations are short, hold little weight, and are surface level, creating bad communication habits and causing miscommunication and misinterpretation.
For our communication research, we had 3 limitations. Gender representation, participants were acquaintances, and we only had dating participants for romantic relationships. For gender representation, we only interviewed 1 man and 1 non-binary person. We believe that if we had a more equal representation of genders, then we would have had more accurate results. For our participants, all subjects were people that we knew. We feel that if we interviewed different people, that they would have given us different results because we fear that our acquaintances would have given us results that they felt that we wanted or the results that favored in our favor. And for our dating participants, we only interviewed people in romantic relationships that were dating rather than engaged or married relationships. We believe that if we had a better mix of relationships, then our responses would have differed.
A focus group could have been used to affect the quality and quantity of the answers provided. It could open up participants to feel more comfortable in a group setting versus an interview style. Avenues such as married versus dating participants would have provided more of a variety of genders and a random selection of partners that could result in different responses. Some problems that we faced could be the lack of gender representation, only interviewing acquaintances, and only having the representation of those in dating relationships. Thank you for watching our presentation.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Phil Robinson.
And I'm Joshua Ware.
And this is our project on if horror movies result in a prolonged paranoia within the human mind, an analysis of previous and current traumas related to the accessibility and time after viewing these said films.
Now, to start us off, we wanted to discuss what our survey was about. Our survey was to hope to get a better understanding of the impact of horror movies on a person's mental health. Now, our research gap, we wanted to look deeper into if horror movies affected people's mental health, and that's why our survey was important and unique to our group. One of the theories we used was the social learning theory, and our hypothesis 1 was basically if horror movies can negatively impact a person's mood and or perception of reality. And our hypothesis 2 was horror movies can lead to individuals reliving violent scenes or having a PTSD attack. Now, our methodology, our participants, we wanted to aim between the ages of 21, 18 maybe, usually 19 to 26. Now, for the ages 22 through 26, we had about 51 respondents, and the age of 19 through 21, we had about 49 responses, and female identifying people responded with about 63 people. Male identifying people, we had about 33 respondents. Gender fluid people, we had about 1 respondent, and non-binary people, we had about 3. The title of our survey was Horror Movies and Anxiety. We did it on a Google form or a Google survey. It lasted about 3 to 5 minutes, and we spread it by word of mouth, social media, and email chains. Now, for our hypothesis 1, our individual mood and perception of reality, our p-value was 0.44, which is not a very significant correlation. And our H2, which is nightmares or day terrors after viewing these horror movies, had a p-value of about 0.05, which is also not a very significant correlation. Now, confirmation bias is one of the themes we used. It is basically where people confirm their suspicions about how bad the world is. Now, this relates best to ours because horror movies is basically worst case scenario, and it would confirm somebody's suspicions about the real life if they see a scene or maybe relive a scene from this horror movie.
And then the second of ours is cognitive dissonance. And this is where people would do anything they can to prevent or diffuse any personal inconsistencies within their beliefs. So the word dissonance means that it's any psychological discomfort for an individual that can cause negative mindset and negative emotions that ties with it. Now, with that said, horror movies can cause dissonance because these films aim to have a sense of realism within the world, which can result in people losing touch of what is real and then can put them into a state of mental distress.
Now, identity crisis is another theme we used, and it basically is a mental aspect of viewing these horror movies and coming out on the other side, not knowing completely who you are. You may feel sadness, anger, anxiety, and a number of other post-symptoms from viewing these horror movies. And basically it means that people can be portrayed as evil or devilish or even just dumb, oblivious victims of murder.
And another concept that we used was a social learning theory. And this suggests that an individual's behavior is dependent on the environment in which they are raised in and also their motivation to learn. There are 2 types of this concept. This first is vicarious, which means that individuals observe an action first and then repeat the same behavior. The second is reinforcement, where individuals learn from their actions and then repeat them based on whether they were positively or negatively reinforced. With that said, after watching these horror films, many people may find the scenes interesting to a point where they want to relive or recreate these moments in real life, which of course can be potentially dangerous to society and can cause individuals to have a distorted sense of reality. So we also had some limitations with our study. The first is that we only had a sample size of 100 individuals. If we would have maybe did more than that, then we would have been able to have more concrete answers for our survey. Further, we also had a survey that consisted of people only above the age of 18. Now, we could have did people that were younger than 18 or older that could have been able to give us more varied results. And the last one is our variable measurement, which is that we only use the amount of horror movies watched rather than going into detail about what types of horror movies, who you watch them with, where do you watch them, and so on and so forth. For our future research, as I stated earlier, that we could have used a different sample of people that were either younger or older. We could have also used other constructs such as cultivation theory and framing theory. And lastly, we could have used a different experimental method of using a stimuli or anything else to see if we can provoke a certain emotion when the people were taking our survey. So within our discussion, we determined that some people are negatively affected by horror movies, but at the same time, because we didn't have concrete results, we couldn't make a concrete answer about whether or not they are negatively or positively influenced after watching these films. A lot of our participants were also too scared of horror movies in the first place and didn't even decide to watch them. And lastly, most of our respondents watched horror movies around 0 to 2 times a week, which is more than the average individual. That concludes our project, and thank you guys for listening.
Hello everyone, my name is Brooke.
I'm Kristen.
And we're doing our research on the effectiveness of anti-vaping advertisements on college students.
Our research topic, like Brooke said, is about the effectiveness of anti-vaping advertisements on college students. We were going to see how anti-vaping advertisements were an influence on college-age students when it came to their decision to use or to not use e-cigarettes. Our research question was, how are anti-vaping campaigns impacting college students? Our methodology was, we
interviewed 12 total participants from ages 18 to 23. 6 of them were vaping, and then 6 of them did not vape, and more specifically had quit vaping in the past, and they were a university student. Our recruitment procedures were texting them and using a GroupMe, which is a messaging app for what we use at the university. Our procedures were, the average length of the interviews were around 3 to 4 minutes, and the data was transcribed by the app Otter. Thematic analysis, we used thematic analysis, and the themes that we developed using were repetitions, keywords, and forcefulness.
When it came to our results, we had 4 common themes. Our first theme was our platforms. There were repetition of where the participants remembered seeing the advertisements, and a lot of the platforms that were mentioned were social media or streaming platforms like TikTok and Instagram. Our second theme was the recollection from the advertisements themselves. So most participants remembered limited parts of the advertisements, but overall they remembered that there was health risk involved, both mental and physical. Our fourth theme was the impact, or our third theme, was the impact from the advertisements themselves. So participants noted how the advertisements made them feel when viewing them. While most participants claimed that there was little to no impact, few actually stated that the advertisements made them judge their decision whether or not to vape. And our fourth theme was actually the influences on vaping decisions. So this theme was actually broken up into 3 sub-themes, and this sub-theme is the health aspect. Participants commonly stated that they chose to quit because of the physical and mental health aspects that came along with vaping.
The second sub-theme was the financial component. We commonly heard during the interviews that when it came to the student's decision to vape or not, money was a common concern. The final sub-theme is peer pressure amongst groups. Participants frequently said that their peers' opinions on vaping would influence their decision to use or not. After analyzing our results, we can infer that students were around vaping so much it made them not feel as bad, so they were the fear of missing out in vaping in social situations was a big factor. Their surroundings also was a big factor because they did not make them feel as bad, and the advertisements were unrelatable to them, so they were not very receptive of the situations and scenarios in the advertisements.
And after discussing our results and all of that, we realized that there were some limitations to our research. So we figured out that there was 2. So the first limitations was our subjects, that we only interviewed 12 people, and we think that if we would have interviewed more, then we would have had more varied results. And then our second limitation was our questions that we asked. We felt that our questions were not detailed enough, and so in order next time, if we were to do this again, we would ask more detailed questions in order to provoke better answers.
And our future research, if we wanted to do this research again, or if anyone else is interested, we would do things differently. There were only 12 participants, as Brooke has said, so maybe to interview more and have a more diverse in age, ethnicity, gender identity, race, things like that, and to show the advertisements during the interviews before we started so participants could recollect the advertisements more. Thank you so much for watching.
Thank you so much for watching. Why'd you say it like a question?
Hi, my name is Loren DuBois, and today I'm going to be presenting dress codes and their effect on self-identity. So my study looks into the influence that dress codes have on self-identity, and does this restriction of clothing have an effect on how we view ourselves? I know that I personally grew up with the dress code, and I did move schools multiple times, and there were dress codes at each school. So I decided to research this because there was a lack of hard evidence implying that dress codes target females. It's widely talked about that females do tend to feel like they are targeted by dress codes. And there was also a lack of research into if dress codes affect self-identity. So the theories that I used were the theory of dramaturgy, which is basically saying that there is a self that you present to other people, but behind closed doors, that it's different than what is presented out to people. And I also looked at Cooley's looking glass self, which is also saying that when presenting yourself in social situations, that tends to reflect on you as a person. So you are influenced by that social identity that you've established. And so my hypotheses were females are more likely to feel pressure to wear more expensive brands of clothing, and females are more likely to feel targeted by dress codes. And my post hoc hypothesis was if a participant had a dress code in primary school, then they would feel as if their clothes represented their identity. So for my methodology, my participants were 70% female, 29% male, and 1% non-binary. 80% of these people had a dress code in primary school. And my participants were mostly Longwood and Hampton-Sydney students, as well as anyone over the age of 18. I did market my survey on my social media, Facebook, Instagram. I also sent it in group messages, and I ended up having a total of 100 participants. So for the procedures, I had 16 questions. It took about 1 to 2 minutes to complete my survey. There were 15 closed-ended questions and 1 open-ended question. And for my results, both my H1 and H2 were found to be significant, and my post hoc hypothesis was found to not be significant. And so for my constructs, gender, dress codes are not the same for all genders. I know personally I got dress coded for things such as wearing leggings, shorts, tank tops, and so females did end up feeling more targeted than males. And one of my quotes from my open-ended question said, "I think dress codes target women and make them need to change to make themselves be fit to not distract men. I think it's messed up and people should be able to wear whatever they want." My next construct was self-identity. Participants were found to feel social pressure to buy specific brands and clothing, and self-identity is formed off of this social identity. And one quote from my open-ended question said, "So when considering dress codes, I believe they need to be put away with and that uniforms are the way to go because they save money as well as prevent income inequality in the school system. So it prevents people from feeling bad for one person because they don't have as much money." For class, 30% felt like their clothing masked their background. This is significant considering clothing is just material. It doesn't really mean anything in terms of branding. So dress codes do, in fact, limit the ability to conform to societal norms, possibly making bullying more of a problem. Dress codes can be a form of classism because not everyone can afford or have clothing that is deemed appropriate for schools, as well as dress codes are very biased on females and gender non-conforming people. And finally, my last construct was media consumption. Social media influences us consciously and subconsciously, and almost all participants spent over 30 minutes on social media. So it really puts into thought about how much we're on media and how that may influence us. And 50% of the participants reported 2 to 3 hours daily. And another quote said, "I think it's acceptable to want students to wear appropriate clothing at school, but targeting girls, especially young girls, for wearing spaghetti straps or barely cropped shirts is unacceptable." And that just kind of puts into context the fact that that's what's trending right now, and that's what people tend to want to wear more nowadays. And so for my limitations, Longwood is 70% female, so that kind of skewed how my research came into play because I didn't have that many male participation occur. And so for my survey construction, I had a lack of questions regarding specifics with class, just demographic information that would have been helpful. Variable measurement, not looking at genders other than male or female, so there was only 1%, which was non-binary, and that was the only gender that was accounted for other than male and female. And for future research, I would definitely make sure that there were more males in the sample size. And other constructs, I would look at social identity because I've mentioned it a lot, but I didn't use it as a construct, and I kind of wish that I did, just because it has such a big influence on how you view yourself. And for experimental method, I would look at uniform versus no uniform because a lot of private schools do have that uniform and most public schools do not. And so in conclusion, dress codes limit self-identity. The person that you may see may not be who they really are. Social identity does have that big influence on how you view yourself with your self-identity. There's social pressure conforming to societal norms, and there's often a lot of bullying. And females do feel more pressure to wear more expensive brands of clothing. So, thank you.
Hi everyone, I'm Seth King,
Hi, I'm Megan Barr.
and today our research is on the college effects on students' religious faith. The purpose of our research is to better understand how college students keep their religious practices while attending university. Maintaining faith in how you do it can be relatively tricky. With various types of religions and many different higher education opportunities across the United States, researching how people attempt to maintain their faith or how they have lost their faith innately in a new setting will give us a better understanding of how college may affect one's religious beliefs. The literature review provides an overview of the relationship between education and religion, and how these two together show more significant achievements in education and career fields, as well as examining why some choose to continue their religious practices or have become religious when pursuing higher education. For our study, the research question is, how do college students maintain their religious practices at university?
The methodology is a brief guideline for the research process and steps that took place while conducting the research. This is divided into 3 separate sections: participants, procedures, and data analysis. Starting off with participants, the research was conducted after receiving approval from the university's Institutional Review Board. Before each interview, the participants were briefed on specific instructions and guidelines for the interview process. To collect data, there were a total of 12 interviews conducted. For procedures, the average length of an interview was 7 minutes long. The interviews were recorded with participants' knowledge and then transcribed from an iPhone onto a password-protected laptop. And finally, for data analysis, this is the process of identifying specific themes or patterns from the data the interviewees presented.
For our first theme, Are You There, God? It's me, a college student. It is possible that being at the university, away from home, where religion would be more routine, has led the participants to search for religion on their behalf. This is supported by participant 5, who stated, "Religion strengthened a lot, and I've over the years really taken a deep dive into it and just try to grow on it." The second theme, New Place, New Practice, gives us an insight into how college students' religious practices are adapting and finding new ways to incorporate the religion into their lives of an emerging adult.
Our next theme, Inner Peace, we found that there is no relationship between academia and practicing religion. The students practicing their faith find a sense of inner peace while having to complete academic work. Participant 8 stated, "It helped me because it gives me peace and the peace I need whenever I'm going through a hard time." Our final theme, When in Doubt, Pray It Out, we discovered that participants stated being at college did not make them doubt their faith. Religious faith is essential to the participants' daily lives and college experiences. Participant 12 stated, "If anything, I feel like university increased my belief in faith."
We believe there is a relationship between the two environments. One of the environments is an educational environment, such as K through 12, college, or a university. The other environment is the religious setting, depending on the type of church the participants reside with. The participants have had to move away from their educational environments and their original religious environments when coming to the university. This is important because the participants have had to adjust to both of the aforementioned environments to maintain a balance between them. However, because the educational environment is different, going from K through 12 to a university, it does not mean the approach in which they are taught is different. Therefore, this is important because what is changing is not only the religious environment, but more importantly, the religious practices approach.
Another point is that the different branches of religion relate to different majors offered at university. We associate these two because when a student is in a particular major, they are taught specific criteria for success, which could be said for different religious branches. They follow, practice, and learn about their religion in different ways. The certain ways each religion practices is what makes them important to the people who are a part of them. It is what separates each branch from one another, making them unique. It gives us a sense of identity, which can be said about what major someone is a part of at university.
For our first conflict, we believe that since the interviews were conducted and there was only 12 of them, we believe that if more than 12 participants had been interviewed, more information could be gathered. Secondly, our research was limited to participants at a small-sized East Coast university rather than a larger, more diverse university. Lastly, since the topic of our research study is religion, we believe participants may have experienced some shame to admit certain aspects of religion when asked questions.
For further research on this topic, we would expand the number of participants and conduct longer and more thorough interviews. Next, we would examine the effect of college life on numerous religions and not just a select few. And finally, we would take the time to examine the relationship that high school students have with religion and compare it to college students. Thank you all for taking the time today to listen to our research presentation.
Good afternoon, I'm Floor Schouten, and today I will present my research study on exploring the TikTok influences on consumer behavior on college students. So, previous research studies have explored how social media usage affects consumers to buy a certain product off social media. However, those studies did not explore the TikTok influences that it has on college students. So, the theory I used is the Angle-Collett-Blackwell, the AKB. This is a consumer behavior model of the cognitive process that helps to predict what customers are going to buy. One of my hypotheses are those that have a higher social media usage are more likely to purchase from TikTok. My second ones are females are more likely to purchase on TikTok than males. And my post hypothesis is stated females are more likely to review a product on TikTok before buying than males. So my method. In total, I had a study that consisted of 106 active TikTok users, ranging from the age of 18 till 23 years old. This is 62% female and 37% were male. I had a 14-question Google survey with an average completion time ranged from 1 to 2 minutes. And I used a Likert scale for non-demographic questions. So the results were that the hypothesis 1 was a significant correlation. The second one also had a significant correlation. And the post hypothesis was also significant. So discussion. For the discussion, I summarized my 4 constructs used in my study. The first one is kindness can become its own motive. This is all about the motives of the consumers. So it reflects upon individuals, their needs, feelings, drives, and desires, and even emotions that come with pursuing a product or service. The results of my study showed that 19 males, 47.5%, mostly watched fitness sports content, where only 15% of females said that they watched fitness and sports content. The second construct is male vs female. This is about gender difference that affects the decision making of a consumer as it affects behavior and attitudes. As shown in this study, females were more likely to review a product on TikTok before buying than males. This shows that gender has a difference and plays a role for consumer behavior. So my third construct is how to lose a customer in seconds. This is all about trust. Trust meaning the belief in reliability, the truth, ability, and strength of the company and the product that is bought or not bought by the consumer. For example, I had a question in my survey, quoted, "I enjoy watching branded content off TikTok." This is where satisfaction plays a role for the consumer, meaning that 52% of my participants said that they did not agree with that they enjoyed watching branded content. So this can help the future research and also TikTok to maybe, or businesses to know that some people might lose their customers over seeing too much branded content online. My fourth and final construct is scrolling, and media consumption. Media consumption refers to how much use one may use of text, sound, images offered by the various media channels. I found that for both male and females, most of the TikTok users would like to have filters on TikTok to choose their own content and so control what they will see. So for limitations of my sample, for limitation of my study, I will start with the sample size. So I only had a really small sample of 106 individuals, and more responses would have helped this research develop a better conclusion. For gender, 37% was male and 62% was female. It would have been better maybe for future research too to have more balance in this. Variable measurement, I said that it would be interesting to have put a question in the survey to see the purchases consumers would make weekly and see the differences for males and females. For future research, I set a larger sample, compare results from non-college students, as I specifically for this research put in just the college students, so maybe add in high schoolers too. Other demographics, such as consider the possibility of conducting a similar study involving different demographics. My study was mainly set in the United States and in the Netherlands, maybe more of other countries too. Also the experimental method, incorporating more open-ended questions, as I only included one open-ended question. So discussion. The present findings indicate that both my hypotheses had a significant relationship, and this can help for a greater understanding of how TikTok influences our consumer behavior. There are gender differences for being persuaded to buy something off TikTok, and that the amount of the time a user spends on social media does affect them to purchase something off TikTok. This study has the potential to guide for further research, as the topics are related to the future of TikTok and the future of businesses, to potentially create a bigger audience or to target their audience better. Thank you for tuning in. Okay, you're clear. Perfect.
Green.
And I'm Ellie Provost.
And today we are presenting our research today with the topic of how rewards and consequences affect students' motivation to do their coursework.
Our research topic goal was to determine how much of an effect rewards and consequences have on students' internal and external drives in educational settings. We had 2 research questions. The first one being, how do rewards affect non-first-year college students' motivation to do coursework? And the second research question being, how do consequences affect first-year college students' motivation to do coursework?
When it comes to our methodology, it is split into 3 sections. First, the participants, which our demographics included people who are 18 to 24, and they were also non-first-year students. When it came to recruitment style, we used text message as well as face-to-face methods. Next, when we talk about our procedures, we conducted 12 different interviews, which averaged the length of about 4 minutes each. Once we took that data, we transcribed it on an app called Otter. When it comes to analyzing our data, we chose three themes developing using repetition, keywords, and forcefulness.
Our results ended with extra credit providing a good learning opportunity. An example that a participant pointed out was, just because college is hard in general, I feel like every opportunity there is to get extra credit, I'd take. And this is relevant because extra points help and encourage completion, which is a form of motivation. Another part of our results was critical feedback. Positive feedback leads to positive results. An example from a participant is, I like heavy feedback because then it can push me to fix my mistakes. And then I can know exactly what I need to do, so I like heavy feedback. And this is relevant because it allows improvement on assignments.
When it comes to our last theme, it is late assignments and policies. An example of this is how students react and respond to negative policies that may impact their final grades. An example that we used is from participant 7, which states that it is nice to have that option to have a late policy where they just reduce your grade on the assignment, but it kind of motivates me more to turn it in on time. When we talk about the relevance to this theme, it encourages students to turn their work in on time without any late policies affecting their grades.
For our discussion, extra credit was a big motivational tool for some students. This related back to a study that we mentioned in our literature review done by Dong, Shisaki, and Zhang, done in 2019. The study claimed that institutional reward is not only effective but also efficient. We saw that through our results in the extra credit section. Another aspect was critical feedback, and that also provided motivation that our research showed to be impactful, relating to another study done in our literature review in 2018 by Edmund and Powell that suggests that useful feedback is more beneficial than a grade.
When it comes to our research, we feel that we accomplished everything that we set out to, but although we did have some limitations, the first limitation being the sample size that we used. So we only conducted 12 interviews, and we felt that if a bigger sample size was used, that more information would come about. The second limitation is the timing. Since this research was done closer to the end of the semester, some students were facing anxiety and stress due to exams. And then the last limitation that we faced as a group was doing this research at a predominantly white institution, which basically was the lack of diversity amongst the participations and having a bunch of participants that we did come from the same backgrounds and similar backgrounds. Therefore, our answers did not, they were not different.
When it comes to future research, we suggest examining the short-term and the long-term effects of each motivational tool. Another suggestion for future research would be personality traits. Students may act differently depending on their personality traits, which is something to take into consideration when studying how each person is motivated, because it could all be differently based on the specific person. And another aspect of future research would be to do it at a larger institution. That was one of our limitations, is that we are at a very small, limited institution, but we could find further research at a larger one with more diversity and a bigger population amongst students. Thank you all for listening, and have a great rest of your day.
Hello, my name is Peyton Schaefer.
And I'm Stormy Foley, and today we're going to summarize our research study on the roles of true crime media consumption and fact-checking on undergraduate safety perception. So we were interested in studying how college-age adults' consumption of true crime media content affects their personal safety perception, because when studying previous research, studies such as Intravia et al. In 2017 identified several factors that can impact someone's perception of safety, such as their age or gender. And other studies, such as Kapanik et al. In 2008, identified correlations between media access and perceived risk. However, none of these studies covered college-age adults specifically or true crime media content. So we used two theories proposed by George Gerbner in the 20th century, the first being cultivation theory, which means that the more you see things on social media or media in general, the more you cultivate your own sense of reality, and mean world syndrome, which posits that the more you see violent content, the more you see violence in the world. To formulate our hypotheses for this research study. Our first hypothesis was that if college-age adults more frequently view aggressive crimes on social media, then they will have differing perceptions of safety from those who do not. And our second hypothesis was that college-age students who fact-checked information they come across in the media have differing perceptions of safety than those who do not.
So for our methodology, our participants were mostly female, as you can see, with 121, 77.1% being female, as well as the age demographic. We tried to focus on college-age students, and so the 18 to 23 range was our most popular range for age. For procedures, we created a Google form survey that we submitted and sent out to people through social media, text messages, email, and word of mouth. The survey took, on average, about 3 minutes to complete, and it included scaled questions as well as open-ended questions asking about safety precautions and practices that they are implementing. As well as our results, our first hypothesis was not significant and rejected. Our second hypothesis was significant and not rejected. And our post hoc hypothesis 1 was significant and not rejected. So for our first construct, collegiate crime, it's important to understand this because crime at colleges is different than crime in the world. Some of the things that we focused on were the Michigan State shooting, as well as the Idaho murders, and as well as Gabby Petito, which were all popular cases around colleges. And we asked them a question: what does it mean when asked to identify how long it took participants to hear of crimes? The results showed that 43 heard about it in under 24 hours, 74 in 1 to 3 days, meaning that 117 were aware in less than a week.
And since collegiate crime is so rampant in today's society and covered in the media, it's really important to understand how students fact-check the information that they come across. So our second construct covers the use of multiple sources before believing any content that's seen on the media. More than half of our participants agreed or strongly agreed that they found themselves fact-checking often, which we believe could play a role into the extent in which they believe the things that they see online.
Our third construct was fear of crime. And this is important to note that it does exist, but it sometimes can be unrational. And that unrational fear of crime could be contributed on whether or not that they are fact-checking that information. As well as social media is greatly adding to the fear of crime with the coverage of cases being so popular for people to consume.
And our fourth and final construct was also the dependent variable for both of our hypotheses, and that was safety perception, which for this study was how safe students feel on their campuses. Less than half of our respondents have heard about or seen incidents within the last 6 months that made them fear for their personal safety on campus. However, the answers to that question had much fewer neutral responses than any of our other questions, which suggests that social media might play a role in how strongly people perceive their own safety.
So for limitations, the first limitation was our location. The survey consisted of mostly Longwood University students, and this is not encompassing all colleges, as well as our gender was another limitation, with it only being 121 women responding to the survey. So again, this is not including everyone's feelings on this situation. And then as well as for our survey questions, we asked questions about the consumption of true crime content, but we did not ask about the type of true crime content that they were consuming and whether or not that it was fictional, non-fictional, solved, or unsolved.
Because of these limitations, we do have a few suggestions for future research. The first being to investigate the type of true crime content that's being consumed. So, for example, if they're dramatic depictions of real-life stories from the past, or if they're real-life live streams of crimes on the scene. A second area of research would be the status of the true crime, so whether it's solved or unsolved. That could also impact how it affects perceptions of safety. And then finally, a qualitative study that could cover both and how the type of crime and the status of solved or unsolved of the crime could relate to one another and impact safety perceptions as well.
So when it comes to the discussion, regardless of the baseline fear that there's concern about safety on campus. And we think that it would be very helpful for these universities and colleges to teach their students about safety practices and, know the location of the help buttons on campus and where the campus police is located, as well as giving out safety tools such as rape whistles or pepper spray, because we have seen that in our respondents, they do have safety precautions that they do take by carrying those certain things.
And another point of discussion that relates to our post hoc hypothesis was that fact-checking seemed to be encouraged by students being more aware of crimes that are happening around them. So we encourage colleges and universities to play the news more in shared spaces and or acknowledge more publicly when things happen elsewhere so that students feel more safe on campus. And we believe that capitalizing on cultivation theory by creating environments where people feel as though they're supporting each other's safety could do a reverse effect of the mean world syndrome and create what we like to call the nice world syndrome.
We want to thank you for tuning in today to the 6th year of live streamed research. Please make sure to tune in tomorrow at 11:30 for more presentations, and we hope you have a great day. I know, I was like, just pause. It's all good. Oh, I forgot to thank the people. I'm so sorry. Start the live stream again.